Hello there. Okay, you gotta go somewhere else. Happy Friday, everyone, or happy whatever day you end up watching this on. Today is kind of the first deep dive into this whole thing we're doing for the next month and a half. If you would like even more context about what I meant by that, feel free to click one of the top links in the description down below. It gives a much more expanded version. But the long and short of it is that if you didn't know, this year I'm competing in the United States Barista Championship. It's happening in Boston in the first week of April, and throughout this entire process, I wanted to take you along with it. From the beginning of like scripting to training to like drink formulation to the end result here in honestly about a month is that we're gonna be in Boston and competing with the presentation that we've put together over the past month and a half. But that all being said, it's time to tackle the very first process that I've been working on for the past 2 weeks. And if this is something that you would like to do in the future, this is probably the thing that's gonna take up a big majority of your time because it really is the foundation of your entire presentation. And that is your script. Now, I have brought notes today, so we don't get too off topic as I am known to do. But the first thing we have to talk about is what is the structure of a script when you're competing in the United States Barista Championship. There are kind of 3 core things to remember when you start a scripting process. These are the things that I hold on to and the things that I recommend other people hold on to if they are approaching a competition like this. Number 1 is that your script should be no longer than 15 minutes. If you go over 15 minutes in your entire presentation, you will start to lose points very, very quickly. In fact, if you go even 1 minute over your allotted presentation time, you will be disqualified. That being, if you have a 16-minute presentation when you are only allotted 15, you are donezo at the end of it. The second thing is that your script should probably have some sort of theme and or overarching thesis that you are trying to convey to your judges and to your audience by the end of your presentation. The third thing is that theme that you have put together and the theme of your presentation should have some sort of synergy and or relatability to whatever coffee you are serving and the drinks that you are serving corresponding to that coffee, which really emphasizes that this script is like the groundwork for everything we're gonna do from here on out, which means it's like, it is kind of the most important thing, arguably, honestly, even more important than the coffee you're using. At least that's my take on that. And this this is our little disclaimer. I'm gonna put this at the beginning of most of my videos about USBC because throughout all of this, there are no hard and fast rules about how you should approach a competition like that. There are arguably some methods and or some recommendations I can make that will make your life a little bit easier if you're approaching this. There are some things that you could do that will probably increase your chances of success. But that being said, this is a very, very fluid, pardon the pun, competition. There are so many ways to approach this. So when I'm talking about scripting and when I'm talking about most of the things that go into it, I'm gonna use some general terms. I'll tell you what I'm doing and what I've chosen to do, but take it with a grain of salt because those are the things that work best for me. This sort of approach is what I like to do, but at the end of the day, honestly, whatever works for you is gonna be what's best for you. These are supposedly just some guidelines, a little bit of structure if you're looking for a place to start. I'm very congested today, so if I get a little funky, that's why. Okay, now I sat down to start my script about 2 weeks ago, so I've been working on this for a good amount of time in the grand scheme of how long I have to present, but that's because it took a while to settle on what I was gonna talk about. Now, there are kind of 2 ways one can approach creating a script for USBC or really any sort of coffee competition. The first way you can approach this is you can pick your coffee first, and then you can build your script to fit the coffee that you've chosen. Let's say you're using a coffee that has a really, really unique processing method. Let's say it comes from a really unique farm. Perhaps that is kind of the core message of your presentation. In that case, picking the coffee first and then building your words around it works perfectly. However, that's not really how I'm doing it, so let's talk about the second method. The second method, obviously, is picking your script and your theme first, and then finding a coffee that fits your theme. As a very general example, let's say you have decided that the theme of your script is going to be about how you got started in coffee. And let's say you're talking about the drinks that got you interested in it. You might say your favorite drink beginning was a mocha. In that case, it might be advantageous for you to choose a coffee that is very like chocolate forward, very like comforting and approachable, and something that can really like match that profile of what your original gateway drink was. That's a very easy example of matching your coffee to your script. Both of these methods totally fine. However, they serve two very different purposes, because also in the world of scripting and USBC, there's kind of two general routes one can take. These are, again, not hard and fast, but they are kind of a very general description of two ways you can approach your script. You can approach it from a very, what I like to call, highly technical standpoint. That being, you are talking very in depth about a coffee and its processes, or perhaps you are presenting some sort of technological advancement or something that you are doing with your signature beverage that is very like science-based. Or you can go kind of the opposite way and appeal more to emotion. Let's say you have a very near and dear experience with coffee in your life and you want to talk about that. Your presentation is probably not going to be super highly technical. It's very much going to be about connecting both with your audience and the judges and really expressing those emotions that are connected to you when connected to coffee. Both the routes are great, but when approaching your script, you should probably kind of at least have an idea of which direction you want to go, because at the end of the day, 15 minutes is not a long amount of time. It's actually a very, very short amount of time. And so even though you might have many, many things you want to say, you kind of have to narrow it down to like one sentence and then like expand out on that. Now I'm laying all this groundwork because I want you to kind of understand the thought process that has to go into these sort of scripts to make them very like punchy and concise and like well written and very like flowy for lack of a better word. And while we will be talking about very soon, in fact, what I'm going to be doing this year, because I've pretty much settled on my theme and what I'm going to be doing, I do want to mention what I've done in previous years, because I've done this process twice now to some extent, and I went kind of different directions both years, and for many reasons there were good things about what I did and there were also bad things about what I did. Back in 2019, I competed in the qualifying competition and I also competed in the national competition. Now, I took two different scripts with me to both of those competitions. However, if I would do it again now, I would take the same script. That is something to note too. There are different levels to this competition and you don't have to change your script every time. Little baby barista me did not know that, and so I went and did like 3 times the work that I really needed to do. But that being said, I was left with 2 very different scripts at the end of it. My very first script I ever wrote had this theme of the coffee supply chain. Now, I've mentioned it before, but I have a marketing degree, and at the time I was actively in college. I was a business student, and so we talked a lot about supply chains in a very general sense, in like a very like college-y academic sense. But at the same time, I was starting out as a barista and I was learning a lot about the coffee supply chain. There was a lot of crossover there, and that was a topic that was super interesting to me. So going into my script writing process, I already knew that I wanted my script to kind of follow from farm to like to the barista. Like it is kind of a classic path, because you start at the farm and then you go to a processing plant. Perhaps that's on the farm, perhaps it's somewhere else, and then you like export to wherever you're bringing the coffee to, and then you have the roaster, who is a whole component of this, and then at the end you go to a cafe level and you have the barista, who's kind of the final step of the supply chain. And that was the story that I wanted to tell with the coffee that I served. I believe that year I served a Costa Rican natural coffee. It was very, very delicious, and at the time we had some kind of like personal relations with the farmer who produced the coffee, so I was able to pretty easily put together the pieces I needed to talk about the supply chain. Now, that being said, while it is an interesting topic and very specific to the coffee I was serving, there wasn't that much room for creativity in it, because I was talking about a very, very linear story from start to finish. I think it was a very important story, but there wasn't a ton of room for flexibility, and there wasn't a lot of room if I wanted to say change my coffee midway through the competition or between levels, because I'd kind of locked myself into talking about this one coffee. And so if I wanted to say use like a washed processed coffee from somewhere else, I would have had to do very serious rewrites on my script. And that is exactly what I did. I mentioned before I did like 3 times the work that year that I really needed to do. So I decided in 2019, after I got through the qualifying rounds, that I wanted to change my coffee, because I'm stubborn like that. So we ended up switching finishing my coffee, I believe I was using then a washed process. I'm trying to remember the country of origin. It wasn't super important to my script. I believe it was a washed process from somewhere else in Costa Rica. I could be wrong on that. I will try to double check as much as I can. But anyways, moral of the story is I switched my coffee. And suddenly that script that I had written for qualifiers no longer worked. So I decided, instead of continuing to follow this coffee supply chain, I was gonna scrap my script and I was gonna write something completely different. The script that I then wrote for nationals kind of went the opposite direction of my more technical supply chain speech. I decided to go the route of talking about people's gateways into coffee. I talked very personally about my gateway into coffee, and then I related it back to kind of our role as baristas, taking people, meeting them where they are, and then kind of directing them through how we learn to appreciate coffee to kind of the end, where everyone has this great understanding of why coffee is delicious and how it tastes like different things and all this sort of stuff. This speech was really, really fun for me. And I found that this speech was really where I kind of shone, you know? I had a lot of passion about speaking about the supply chain, but it was more from like an informational standpoint. Like I learned a ton while I was creating that presentation, and that was really valuable to me. But when it came down to it, my passion really came through when you start to talk about, as baristas, how we interact with consumers. That's really what I wanted to dive into. And I also really wanted to talk about moments in my coffee journey that were super important to me. Overall, having this new topic that I was far more passionate about reflected in my scoring for that year. I scored a lot higher on the components related to presentation in my national level than I did in my qualifying level, because as a person and as a speaker, I was communicating a lot better. I was visually more interesting in my like expressions and everything, and I was able to really like kind of like embed a little bit of my this is gonna sound so cheesy, I was able to like embed a little bit of my soul into my presentation, which is really what the judges are looking for, because you don't want to talk about something that you're not passionate about. I think all of us at one point or another can relate to listening to someone talk about something that they're not interested in or something that they're bored with, and it's just not as fun as listening to someone talk about something that they're really, really passionate about. Now, those are the two presentations that I have really formed out in the past couple of years. And that's a lot of background to say that 2 weeks ago, I sat down and I had to decide what the heck I was gonna talk about this year. The tricky thing was that this is like the first real like barista competition in almost 2 years. Due to COVID-19, there was a big delay in when the World Barista Championships were gonna happen, so everything was kind of put on pause to let that occur, so everything could kind of be reset to ground zero so we could begin with the qualifying at national levels again. So there's that to take into context, and along with that time gap between when we've last seen competitions happen, there has been a very, very dramatic shift in the hospitality industry. Now, I've been working as a barista for essentially the entirety of the pandemic, and it has been something else. It has been an experience that has been really rewarding in a lot of ways. It's been an experience that has been incredibly taxing and difficult in a lot of ways, and it's unlike anything I've ever experienced before in my time working in food and beverage and hospitality. And I went into writing my script thinking it would almost be like a disservice to myself and my experience to not at least mention that. You know, we have this right now going into these competitions this year, we have this much bigger like global shift that has happened in the past 2 years, and I really wanted to talk about that. So I kind of started there. And that's a very, very general topic. Like, I knew I needed to hone it in a little bit more. I was like, okay, COVID's happened. Hospitality is really hard. It kind of sucks most of the time, but at the same time, I still really love it. And so there's this weird like back and forth in me of like, how do I explain these emotions and like these changes that have happened in the past 2 years in 15 minutes? So that's where I started with my script writing process. Now, the next thing I did after I kind of decided the general direction I wanted to go, and this was on recommendation from my coach, was I literally got a packet of sticky notes. I just started writing down words, sentences, phrases, pictures of things that I might want to include in my presentation. This is like one big game of word association. I was like, okay, the last 2 years, okay, just write down everything you can possibly think of. And me, being a pretty visual learner, that was really, really helpful for me, because at the end of it, you know those crime boards where you have like pieces of string, like tying all the pieces together? That was essentially what I created in sticky note form. And it was super helpful, because all these words and things that had been like floating around in my brain, I was able to put out on one big table, and I was able to start like moving them around and fitting where they all went. At the end of my sticky boarding adventure, what I came to the conclusion of is that I want to really hone in on how a barista's unique value proposition has changed now rather than what it was 2 years ago. And this all even goes back to how we've always talked about coffee in waves. We referred to like first wave coffee and second wave coffee and third wave coffee as these very general terms to define the eras, if you will. This goes back to talking about when coffee was really commercialized by chains and brought to a higher consumer level, now to when we have like third wave cafes, which take coffees that are at a very, very high grading scale and kind of breaking down and deconstructing the fancy drinks we serve back down to their original forms so one can appreciate the coffee. There's these very general terms we use to describe how coffee has evolved. But since COVID, there's been this like kind of shakeup, because all of a sudden, especially with the use of the digital era, social media, and like all of that, we've seen this like unprecedented like acceleration of coffee as a consumable beverage and as just like a thing. Like the industry has changed at a rate that we haven't seen before. And within that, we still have baristas. We have people like me, and potentially you, if you are also a barista, who've kind of just been swept along in this very rapidly changing environment. And it's been chaotic. And at the end, I think there is like this kind of question of, how do we fit into this anymore? How do we meet consumers when all of a sudden going to a cafe is no longer just like a mindless thing that we do? It's something that inherently has risk to it now with COVID-19, and that's something that we haven't really faced before. It's a really interesting conundrum of how do we offer people safety and comfort and hospitality at the end of the day when we are dealing with this overarching thing that is like looming over the world. So that's what I kind of came down to. That's what I want to talk about this year. That was a little bit of the process of how I got there. Now, within all of that, there is some component of wanting to speak directly to your judges. The idea of the United States Barista Championship is kind of taking the raw skills that baristas develop in a cafe and taking them to like a much like expanded, a very, very like high level of it. Because obviously the types of coffees that we serve in the Barista Championship, the types of drinks that we serve, all this stuff isn't accessible on like it's not really accessible on a cafe level. These are generally coffees that are very, very expensive. These are pricey coffees that you will only really see purchased by a select few. These are not like everyday coffees, and these drinks are not ones that are really like replicable in cafes. Generally, these are ones that have like multiple steps and like very, very hyper specific ingredients and like all this stuff. Now that's a bit, or I guess it's probably a lot, because I'm quite verbose about all of this. That's a good deal about how I came onto this year's presentation topic. Now, once I had that, I had to kind of decide, did I want my presentation to be more interactive, or did I want it to be kind of your standard like 3-course process where you have your 15-minute presentation, you serve the judges your 3 courses, and that is that, a neat bow on top. And that method is 100% fine. That's kind of how this entire competition is laid out, and it's a wonderful, simple way to go through it. However, because it is also this kind of like amorphously like creative thing that gives you a lot of gray area to mess around with, I had to make the decision if I wanted to add another element alongside my 3 drinks and my presentation. I'll add a good amount of examples in the description down below, presentations in the past that you might want to check out. One of the main ones, a good example of this that comes to mind, is actually from the current reigning United States Barista Champion, who also took number 2 internationally. She is the number 2 in the World Barista Championship, and that is Andrea Allen from Onyx Coffee Lab. What she did in the 3rd act, right before she served her signature beverage to the judges, is she actually walked through, and with all 4 of her sensory judges, she had a hand washing that happened before each of them enjoyed their drinks. It's very hard to explain. I will link her description down below because I think just watching it really brings it together. But the act of hand washing was a really core component of her entire presentation, which was talking about layering experiences and also hospitality in the current environment, and it fit in perfectly. But that being said, it was an extraneous added interactive element that she brought to her presentation. There was some risk to it because it takes time, it takes effort, and if something goes wrong with it, you could potentially go overtime, you could potentially spill things. There's more risk that comes with it. But that being said, when it's done really well, and she did it very, very well, it's a really, really amazing thing to see. So that's where I had to decide, like, do I want to do that? Can I do that? That's when I kind of got to this point where I was like, do I have like an interactive thing that I want to do? Like I'm not gonna wash the judges' hands, obviously, but like, is there something else that fits into my theme? This is the question that my coach and I were mulling over for like a week. We were scratching our brains thinking, how do we fit something fun? Like how do we like just jazz this up a little bit? Because the presentation topic is good. I think my writing for it is good, but I wanted to do something else. Like I wanted to make this kind of spicy. Also mentioning my coach, some of y'all might know him because he is a fellow content creator, really awesome guy. Just so everyone knows, because we will be seeing more of him in the future, shout out to Lance Hedrick. He's rad. I will also link his channel down below, and he is kind of my coach, my wall to bounce things off of for this next month and a half. But that being said, we were scratching our heads and we came up with an idea. And this is where all of y'all, and I'm talking about you, could be involved if you want to be. As I mentioned before, I am talking about the Barista's UVP in our current state, which is highly automated and highly digital in how we communicate coffee. And we were like, digital, online, this thing's gonna be live streamed. How cool would it be if we were able to bring as many of you as possible in on this presentation and this experience as possible? So rather than just watching this experience, you would be having a comparable tasting and sensory experience alongside the judges who were there in person. So there will be more information on this as we get closer to the date. Like this is something that will take a lot of time to figure out. It will take a lot of time to script and to plan and all sorts of things. But I do want to give you the preface that in the future, in the first week of April, if you would like to partake along with the judges in this presentation, in this sensory experience, there will be a way for you to do that. There will be more information. We'll talk about it a lot. I'm going to preface this and set a lot of groundwork for it, but I just wanted to mention it here, just to kind of get your brains turning on what's going to be happening. So if you would like to be very up to date on how this is all going to go down, I do recommend following me on like Instagram. That's going to be a place where I can share a lot of this because it's very like text heavy platform and I can kind of like store things there. But that being said, this entire presentation will have an interactive element to it that will involve you. I'm very excited about that. We have talked a lot about scripting today. I've talked a lot about what I have done in the past, a little bit about what I'm doing this year, and a little bit about how one should approach scripting, at least as kind of like a starting place of where I have started in the past. I've mentioned it before, but I will reiterate that all of these are kind of just guidelines. Again, what works best for me doesn't always work best for someone else. This is kind of, honestly, it's my motto across coffee, is that I don't want to give you hard and fast rules because I truly don't believe there are any. I think there are general guidelines that can perhaps lead to a more successful result, but there are always 100% always exceptions to those guidelines, and really it's whatever works best for you. With this being sort of a time capsule of this entire presentation process, I do have to talk a little bit about what I am doing personally, and maybe it works for you too. Maybe you have a a funny little brain just like I do that works the same way, where just talking a lot and writing things out and thinking about different scripting methods is what works best for you. And in that case, feel free to follow along. I have a little bit more scripting to do because the next stage very, very soon here is memorization, which is the not so fun part of this entire thing. Believe me, it is far easier for me to write than it is for me to memorize. I hope this was a little bit helpful for you. I hope maybe in the future for anyone years from now doing this competition, this can be a little bit helpful. And I hope maybe it was a little bit educational. You've gotten to see a little bit of like inside my brain, which is always interesting for people. But that being said, I think that was the video. I think I have talked enough. And I'm sitting on like my lav mic cord right now, so that is also that's also kind of fun. Now, we have some very fun videos coming up in the next few weeks. We have some normal videos. We also have some very interesting competition videos talking about why I have been freezing milk and slowly thawing it for the last 2 weeks. I swear, my house is just full of either milk or like random coffee supplies just sitting like unboxed around my place. It's a little chaotic right now, but lots of fun stuff is happening and I can't wait to show you very, very soon. But today is not that day. That day will be like next week. Anyways, I need to stop talking. I'm gonna go finish the rest of my tea and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, you can find me here once a week, if not slightly more. You can find me on TikTok and or Instagram pretty much every day. And yeah, feel free to subscribe if you're not, ring the bell, all the things. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great day.